far off Essos, Queen Daenerys Targaryen rules over a court rife with intrigue, but while her subjects may involve themselves in plot after plot against each other and indeed against the Queen herself, they stand united against their enemies in the field, with advisors and counselors such as Miri Mazdur, Hizdar Zo Larok, the scribe Missandei, and the mysterious Quaithe. The Dragon Queen sows confusion upon her enemies, while her commanders Marcelyn and Skahaz Kandaq keep their troops in line both by example and the whip's bloody lash. Thanks for stopping by Big Top Gaming. My name's Brian, and in this video, I wanted to talk about the Targaryen Hero Box 3. Originally, this was going to be a video about Skahaz Kandaq, and it was more like a commander focus, but I think the Targaryen's Hero 3 box is so exciting and brings so much more to the Targaryen faction as a whole that I really just wanted to review the whole box, and then the commander focus will come later. So the Targaryen Hero Box 3 is supplied with 6 miniatures, and among those we end up getting 4 new NCUs, 2 new commanders, and then 3 new attachments. So Targaryen Hero Box 3 is extremely exciting for the faction because it introduces a lot more versatility into Targaryens than what they had before. Of course, every Hero Box does that, but with Targaryens, they essentially had what I would consider a flat hero box release, and when I say flat, I mean like there was no fizz, no pop, no interest in it. It was basically like a glorified attachment box, in my opinion. There was no commander within the Drogo Blood Rider box. There were just 4 attachments and then a unit that you could only bring with one commander who only has one version. I really would have liked to have seen another version of Khal Drogo in there that was maybe more geared towards trying to take the Iron Throne. I think there was a really big opportunity that was missed right there. But instead of complaining about Hero Box 2 for Targaryens, let's start off with some of the commanders for Hero Box 3 and just give a quick overview of those, because these 2 new commanders offer some really interesting lines of play for the faction. First up, we have Skahaz Kandaq, and as an attachment, he brings the order Insight that triggers when this unit is performing a melee attack before rolling attack dice. The attack gains Vicious and rolls the highest attack die value. He also brings another order called Mark Target. Start of a friendly turn, you target one enemy unit within line of sight and within long range, and they become vulnerable. For cards that Skahaz brings, we've got Keeping the Peace, that triggers when an enemy NCU activates. You target one enemy combat unit within long range of Skahaz's unit. Until the end of the turn, that enemy cannot be targeted by tactic zones. You also have a secondary trigger on here for start of the friendly turn. You draw 1 tactics card. This solely exists, not solely, but the reason it exists on here is since Skahaz is considered part of the card's function, it allows you to cycle the card when you don't have him on the table. Next up, we have the Queen's Law. This triggers when an enemy after an enemy combat unit completes an attack, you attach this card to that enemy until the end of the round. While attached during your friendly turns, that enemy loses all abilities and cannot be targeted by their friendly tactics cards. When that enemy is destroyed, you gain 1 victory point. If this card's removed and the enemy has not been destroyed, your opponent gains 1 victory point. The third card for Skahaz is Eyes of the Watch. This triggers at the start of an enemy turn. You target up to 2 enemy combat units in long range of Skahaz's unit. If either of those units performs an action this turn, it suffers -1 speed and rolls -1 attack die until the end of the turn. It also has the cycling trigger so that you can draw a card when Skahaz is not on the unit anymore, or is not on the table anymore. Of course, he wouldn't be in his unit if he's not on the table. The final card is Skahaz's exchange card. This is called Giskari Justice, or Giskari Justice. After a friendly combat unit is targeted by an enemy ability or tactics card, after resolving that ability or card, you target 1 enemy in short range of that unit, and it suffers 4 hits and then suffers 1 panic test. This card also removes the Unstoppable Advanced Tactics card, which is not so terrible, but I feel like Skahaz is going to be playing with more infantry units and less cavalry. So losing unstoppable advance actually is not an amazing thing for him. But as with all Targaryen commanders, the exchange of cards is usually something. I think the more powerful a commander is, the more intense the exchange card is. So one of the things that I find most exciting about Skahaz as a commander is that he brings a little bit of that Queen of Marine feel to him without being extremely hard control. There are like the Queen's Law and Keeping the Peace definitely feel like hard control cards, whereas Eyes of the Watch ends up getting you some extra combat effectiveness without having to commit attacks to it, since most Targaryen infantry units are fairly expensive, except for when you're looking at something like Stormcrows or mostly Stormcrow mercs. But when you look at his attachment, he definitely feels like he's got a little bit more manipulation on the battlefield too. Well, not so much manipulation. You've got condition placement with mark target, which is great. With you not being able to take, the unit of Warcry in this faction, the Blood Riders, having the ability to project vulnerable is good for a unit, or good for a commander who wants to make sure they get to the long game. But then insight also plays into that as well, where you get some panic manipulation in a faction that doesn't really have a whole lot of it, and you can make sure that if your unit's getting down to its lower ranks, you can be effective in the game for the long run. It means that with Skahaz, you don't need to put him in the most survivable unit in the universe. I don't mind putting him in something like Unsullied, but with having Insight, you can put him in a unit that maybe is a little bit more risky, so that you can make sure that you're rolling those high attack dice and then putting other valuable attachments within the Unsullied units. Overall, I'm extremely excited for Skahaz, and I look forward to making a full video on him, but I just wanted to give a quick introduction on him and kind of give you the gist of what he's all about. So as of recording of this video, Cool Mini or Not hasn't updated the app to include Hero Box 3, so I'm pulling a lot of the cards from a Song of Ice and Fire builder, and with Marcelyn is where we start to get some really camera flare issues with some of the cards here. So instead of scanning my own in my printer, I'm just ripping them off of here. So bear with me. I wish I could have just been a little bit more proactive and scan these in myself, but we're just going to move on instead of apologizing. So the other commander that comes in this box is Marcelyn, the Mother's Men commander. As an attachment, he brings the ability Dauntless to his unit, which states that each time this unit passes a morale test, it restores 1 wound. He also brings unfaltering conviction. I guess his conviction might not be flattering. Who knows? Unflattering. God damn it, Brian. Unfaltering conviction. Each time a friendly combat unit is destroyed, you place 1 order token on Marcelyn. This unit gains the following based on the number of tokens. 2 or more, the unit's attacks gain +1 to hit, and then 3 or more, the unit gains +1 to defense rolls. For commander cards, we first come across Devotees of the Dragon. This triggers when a friendly NCU claims the combat position on the tactic zone. You replace the zone's effect with deploy 1 freedmen unit fully within long range of a friendly table edge, or fully within short range of Marcelyn's unit, and at least 1 inch from an enemy unit. Next up, we have Devastating Impact. That triggers when a friendly unit is performing a charge action before rolling charge distance dice. Enemies successfully charged by this unit become panicked and vulnerable. If this targets Marcelyn's unit, they may re-roll any charge distance dice. Next up, we have Warcry. This triggers when a friendly combat unit activates. That unit performs 1 morale test. On a success, target 1 enemy unit within long range. It becomes panicked and vulnerable. Finally, we have his exchange card Supply Aid. That triggers at the start of a friendly turn. You target 1 friendly combat unit. That unit suffers up to 3 wounds. Restore 1 plus that many units to 1 other friendly unit within long range. You also remove the Field Control card when you add this to the deck. So Field Control is that infamous Targaryen deck that shuts down the maneuver position, and the reason why it's infamous is because if your opponent has any ability that exchanges the ability with the or the effect with the maneuver position, you just can shut that card down completely because of the way that the timing works in terms of active players. You don't get a say on how the triggers stack. The active player triggers go first, and then the non-active players go. So overall, I really appreciate Marcelyn. The thing that I don't like about him is that he brings two cards that are abilities on cards, and typically I don't appreciate seeing these within Commander's suites. Warcry is a really good ability, and we don't have access to it when you play any commander other than Khal Drogo. And I guess it's still a really powerful ability, so I don't mind it so much being on a card. Honestly, I think Warcry is an issue in the game right now, so having it as a commander card wouldn't bother me so much if this weren't just available to almost every single faction in a really abundant form. Like if Stark players are sleeping on she-bears, I tell you. But Supply Aid is another one where I don't know if this completely feels like it's commander card worthy. Especially not an easy trade for something like field control. But the healing in Targaryens, I feel like every time I build a Targaryen list, I'm always bringing some type of healing NCU or a Glory Seeker. So having Supply Aid might free up some of that a little bit. Devastating Impact is really good. We definitely can see that there are a lot of different tokens that Marcelyn can put out. So I think some people, when they look at Targaryens, they don't feel like they have a whole lot of condition game, but Devastating Impact and Warcry can really help you get there. Devotees of the Dragon is a really neat card. I think that it's one of the things that makes me look at Missandei a little bit more, and we'll get to her soon. Just so that you can try and pull Devotees of the Dragon out right away so you can get a free unit of Freedmen on turn one. This means that when I'm trying to fill out points and I might not have enough to really throw another NCU or a decent attachment into any of my units, I'm typically looking for Jorah on a horse or a Freedmen unit, and typically mostly I'd just be going for Jorah, but now I don't have to really worry about making the decision difficult because I can just add Freedmen early in the game as long as I'm taking this. So exchanging the combat zone is really not fun. I would have liked it if this was exchanging any zone instead of the combat zone specifically, since getting that extra attack is a really big deal. But exchanging the combat for one turn just so you can get another unit isn't that bad. Plus, being able to start that unit within short range of Marcelyn's unit, they don't come into play activated or anything. That means you end up getting the bonus that they have for gang up almost immediately. So I think Devotees of the Dragon is a very interesting card, and if people are a little bit mopey that it replaces the combat, I wouldn't worry too much about it since you're getting some extra efficacy by putting those within short range of Marcelyn. The attachment, I really enjoy the Unfaltering Conviction. Since I think you'd be putting him in an Unsullied unit, it's really easy for them to start clipping through units, so it might not be too difficult to get to that 3+ token range, and then that just means that your Unsullied are hitting on 2s, re-rolling all the time, so being able to fish for precision with the Sword Masters gets really spicy if you want to play the risk of looking for those 6s. But as the game goes on, getting +1 to defense rolls on them can make them a very difficult unit to get rid of. So I can imagine that most games you're playing Marcelyn, you're going to be seeing Marcelyn through to the end of the game. Overall, Marcelyn's a really amazing commander as well. Probably a little bit more excited about Skahaz, but I think Marcelyn's got some definite play, and once you get him on the table, that'll become a little bit more apparent. So the Targaryen Hero Box 3 ends up bringing 4 NCUs, and 3 of those are 4 points each. So this is a really big it's a relief for Targaryens, since a lot of their NCUs have been fishing from that 5-point limit. And every time a neutral NCU has gotten bumped up to 5 because it's too good, it hurts Targaryens not just as much as neutrals, but definitely they feel it as well because they haven't had the greatest access to NCUs over the last couple years here. But let's start off with what I consider the best NCU in the box, and that's going to be Quaithe of the Shadow. For 4 points, Quaithe begins the game with 2 order tokens on her. At the start of an enemy turn, you may remove 1 order token from Quaithe. If you do, you target 1 enemy unit. If that unit performs an action this turn, before resolving that action, one of your friendly combat units may perform 1 maneuver, march, or retreat action. So, Quaithe, this ability can just be extremely devastating to your opponent. Typically what I've done is I've waited until the end of their turn to where they only have their 1 unit left, and then I'll pop the way revealed. And with Quaithe, if you're combining her with cavalry, like I like Quaithe in my Khal Drogo list with Blood Riders, your opponent wants to activate that last unit. They really, really do. But if they're going to trade the activation of their unit for a cavalry unit to get to a point where they can maneuver into the rear of something, Screamers are extremely dangerous when they're charging out the backside of any unit. And if you have a unit that's more devastating, it has a little bit more combat effectiveness, like something like Flayed Men charging someone in the back is bonkers. So they have to choose whether they're going to make you waste your order token, in quotes, or they're going to activate that unit and just make the sacrifice that they're going to take a devastating hit from the rear on one of your units that's been able to maneuver into the back. I had a recent game where I was able to get Hurricanes in the backside of a Stormcrow unit, and they did not. They survived 1 charge from them and then lost it to the other Hurricane buddy cop unit that was there. So Quaithe can get tons of work done and manipulate your opponent's decision matrix quite a bit. Now, there are some ways you could maybe do some big brain plays if you wanted to stop your opponent from activating a particular unit that needed to go or was benefited by going early. You could just de-incentivize them from attacking with a unit that's engaged with your stuff just to use her as more of a control piece. I feel like I get more effectiveness out of trying to bait those late turn advantage plays, but it just speaks to the versatility of Quaithe and why I think she's such an amazing NCU, because she can only do this twice, but those 2 times really can swing the game. Once you start charging units in the rear, it really doesn't stop. Your opponent's typically going to be facing forward, and if they're positioning in a way to try and stop you from wrapping around them, they're exposing one other side. So I think I just can't speak enough about how amazing Quaithe is, and if once you get the hang of how to play her, she can do a ton of work for you. So since we mentioned her earlier, we're going to go down to Missandei the Scribe. For 4 points, she brings the ability Wisdom Beyond Her Years. At the start of the game, you search your tactics deck for 1 Commander Tactics card and place it face down near this card. Once per game at the start of a friendly turn, you may discard 1 Tactics card from your hand. If you do, you take the face down card and add it to your hand. So for 4 points, she's got this 1-shot ability, and that's it. I don't think it's the most terrible thing in the universe. If she's still able to take zones and just be an activation, that's perfectly fine. I think it would have been cool to see her get a point reduction if she was taken with someone like with Daenerys, but that I think going back to the era of 3-point NCUs is not where anyone wants to go. But at any rate, there are plenty of commander cards that are just really amazing for Targaryens. And that's true for anyone, but for Targaryen specifically, every single commander has a card that lets you gain extra victory points. So if you want to try and gain an early advantage, you can go ahead and shuffle one of those cards into her and be able to pull it when you need it instead of drawing it too early or too late and let it clog up your hand, because we don't want to be losing those cards, but we don't want to use them too early to where we're not going to be able to get that point, or in some cases give your opponent an extra point. I think that, Marcelyn was a good example of someone who has Devotees of the Dragon. It's a card they want early in the game so that you can take the combat zone when it's not going to affect you so much. You don't feel like you're sacrificing it. And then pretty much, I can't, it's just hard to, like, taking a counterplot from the Queen of Meereen. Like, there's just so many amazing cards that we would want whenever we want them. And even though Missandei is a one-trick pony, those cards can really shift the game depending on which ones you happen to be grabbing. So I do like Missandei quite a bit, and I've used her to good effect in several of the lists that I've built her into. Rounding out the list of 4-point NCUs in the box, we get Miri Mazdur, God's Wife. For 4 points, she brings the ability Magi's Knowledge. I'm thinking that's probably how they say it, Magi's instead of Magi. I think it's Magi. Magi's Knowledge. Each time Miri claims a zone, you restore 1 wound to 1 friendly combat unit. And then each time Miri claims a zone, you may replace that zone's effect with target 1 friendly combat unit, attach 1 previously destroyed friendly non-commander attachment to that unit, replacing the model as usual, but ignoring the usual attachment limits. So Miri is a phenomenal NCU for Targaryens. She's not as good or better than Quaithe, but she's definitely quite up there. In a world where we have 3-point attachments that end up giving us an extra activation, and people worry about things like Expert Duelist, especially if you're going against another Targaryen player who brings Khal Drogo, who's probably the most effective and dangerous Expert Duelist out there. Miri just gives you a bunch of insurance. Her replacement effect is not a once per game deal, so as long as your opponent keeps trying to jam the unit down that has your value attachment in it, you can always get it back. She does not have to bring it back to the same unit or anything, of course, because if it died, it wouldn't be able to. Well, typically it wouldn't be able to unless you got Expert Duelist away. But she can shuffle those attachments around so you can get your Unsullied Officer bouncing into other units if you're trying to be really aggressive with them. The other really important thing about Miri Mazdur is the healing. I know it's 1 wound and that's not a ton, but having an NCU that does something when it claims a zone in addition to everything else that it does is just extremely valuable at the 4-point slot. So I think Miri is not only a meta call if you're worried about Expert Duelist being everywhere, but she can also juggle those attachments as units die. Some people might actually start going after those Unsullied Officer units pretty aggressively to try and get it off the table, but Miri makes sure that you can transition that through, and that's I just feel like she's extremely valuable for what she does at the 4-point slot. I think it's also worth noting that one of the big things on her card that you can overlook if you're not paying attention is that when you put that attachment in the unit or in a new unit, it ignores attachment limits. So you can have something like your commander and an Unsullied Officer in the same unit, and that is extremely valuable. I think Miri, if you're playing Unsullied and you've got officers in your list, Miri is almost something that you want to take every single time. Healing 1 Unsullied is always good. And if she takes something like the coin zone or the wealth zone, you're healing a full rank with her and removing a condition token. It's just really good. I think she's extremely useful in an Unsullied focus list. So our final NCU is a 5-point NCU and is a funky one. So Hizdar Zo Larok is a little bit like Zaro Zohan Daxos. For 5 points, we get the 14th of that noble name. He brings the ability Merchant Lord's Reach. Each time Hizdar claims a zone, unless its effect is replaced, its effect gains the following additional bonus. On the Crown Zone, if the unit fails the panic test, it may not be the target of friendly orders this round. If you take the Wealth Zone, all other friendly units within short range restore 1 wound. With the Tactics Zone, you may draw 1 fewer Tactics cards to place one condition token on the targeted enemy unit. For the House of the Dead, also discard the top card of your opponent's Tactics deck. So essentially, Hizdar Zo Larok is a buff to each zone that you would take out of those: the Crown, Wealth, Tactics Zone, or Missive, and the House of the Dead. I think that if you're he targets specific zones, so you don't want to have him take like the swords or the maneuver position, which isn't the biggest deal in the world. The 4 zones that he's wanting to take, some of them are a little contentious, and if you're bringing the House of the Dead, it's not like you you're definitely throwing a lot of points into NCUs because pre is also 5 points. I'm pretty sure he's 5 points. So you're already investing 10 points into NCUs right off the top, and that's rough considering we've got a bunch of 4-point NCUs that can kind of be a little bit more value oriented. But Hisdar does bring a lot of utility to some of those other units. I think I need to play him more to really feel the full effect of what he brings to the table. Being able to take the coin zone and echo out an extra heal, it's almost like, what was it? I think it was one of the old Renly cards where he would heal his unit and then one unit or every unit within short range would restore a wound as well. I think it was They Will Make Me King or Loved by the not Loved by the Small Folk. Anyways, I'm spiraling here. Hisdar is interesting. I don't have enough experience with him to be able to give you a full opinion on what I feel about him. I'm always apprehensive about NCUs that kind of add value to a zone, because some of this value, like the tactic zone, I value my cards a lot more than I value condition tokens, and since I'm able to put one condition token on my opponent's stuff, on the opponent's unit that I'm targeting, I don't think I'm really too worried about getting extra ones out there. But time will tell. I could be wrong on Hisdar, but I'm a little bit I'm not mopey. I just don't find an extreme amount of value with him, considering that you already need to bring a 5-point NCU that has a dangerous zone with him in order to get full effect out of him. So rounding out the box with attachments, we'll start off with Miri Mazdur, the Resentful Healer. Miri comes in at 1 point and has the clarifier on the back of her card that states she ignores the usual attachment limits, and she brings the ability Magi's Healing. Each time this unit activates, you roll a d3. On a 3, that unit suffers 1 wound. On a 1, you choose 1, and on a 2, you choose 2. And the same effect can be chosen multiple times. One of the effects is restore 1 wound to this unit, and the other effect is remove 1 condition token from this unit. So Miri's attachment is really cool. I think that for 1 point and being able to ignore attachment limits, she gets a lot of value. The interesting thing is that I want her to be in an Unsullied unit to take off things like Vulnerable. I don't care too much about Panic, but I want to remove Vulnerable, and I want to keep restoring wounds to the unit, and I'm not too worried about losing a wound on them. So the issue is that I also really appreciate her in an Unsullied list as an NCU, so I think this is definitely one of those cases where it's difficult to figure out where you want to place Miri. As a 1-point NCU, or as a 1-point attachment, she brings potential value to a unit, considering you want to be fighting and getting your guys in the mix. If she brings, and you're also like making an expensive unit even more expensive, considering you can take an attachment on top of her, so you could easily elevate an Unsullied unit up to 12 points by taking an officer and her, or 11 points. It depends on which one you're taking, but I think she's good. I don't know if she's better than her NCU version, because that's where the contention comes in, but I think that she's definitely a valuable attachment that could see some use in Unsullied. Next up, we have Skahaz Mo Kandaq, the Merciless Giscari. For 2 points, we end up getting the Insight Order that his commander brought. So that is triggering when this unit's performing a melee attack. Before rolling the attack dice, you gain Vicious and roll your highest attack die value. We also get a modifier to the melee ability called Fueled by Slaughter. After this unit completes a melee attack, if the defender suffered any wounds, this unit restores 1 wound plus 1 additional wound for each one of the defender's destroyed ranks. So Skahaz as an attachment at 2 points feels a little bit on the pricey side, but Insight is an extremely amazing ability for trying to make sure that your unit goes the long run. Being able to just take a unit that's extremely combat effective and not lose any of that efficacy by having Insight on them is good on its own, but then when you combine that with Fueled by Slaughter, it adds to it makes Skahaz an extremely attrition-focused attachment, very reminiscent of his commander, except without the control part of it. With Insight and Vicious, if you're putting him in the right unit, like I hate leaning on Unsullied Swordmasters, but they are almost unparalleled in their melee output. It is not uncommon for you to be taking out a rank every single time these guys attack with Vicious stacked on top of it. People, when they play against Targaryens, are not typically teching for panic, and unless they see dragons or something. But I think people have kind of gotten over dragons. You might see like one in a list here and there, but you're not going to see those old three dragon lists that you used to. At any rate, Fueled by Slaughter plays extremely well into Insight, and it's like one of my favorite things when I see an attachment that synergizes with itself. Everything this guy brings really play to what he wants to do in the unit. So making an Unsullied Swordmaster unit 2 points more expensive is definitely not something that I'm worried about with Skahaz. I think I would be playing him more if I weren't using his commander so much, but he is definitely a phenomenal piece to add some extra oomph to a unit, whether that unit is already good at what it does or just needs to be a little bit better at presenting some damage. I think putting him in Stormcrow Mercs wouldn't be the most terrible thing in the universe, especially if you had somebody like the first version of Daenerys, so you could get your rerolls all the time, but he's definitely a worthwhile 2-point attachment. The final attachment that we have in the box is going to be Marcelyn, the Unsullied Captain. For 2 points, we bring some pretty straightforward abilities with Dauntless, so each time this unit passes a morale test, it restores 1 wound. And then Embolden. Friendly units within short range gain +1 to morale test rolls. So at face value for 2 points, it doesn't seem like Marcelyn is bringing a whole lot to a Targaryen list, but I think the reason why that kind of sticks with people is because if we're looking through the lens of Unsullied, they already have a really great morale stat, so putting them up to 3s isn't the biggest thing in the universe. I mean, you're definitely not going to be failing any ever. I mean, I've failed a couple morale tests with them, and it hurt quite a bit. But Embolden not only buffs the units around you, it also includes yourself, so whatever unit you put him in is going to get better. I think the thing that Marcelyn gets a little bit more value in is if you're playing a little bit more on the Stormcrow focus side. Like if you're playing what the heck is his name? Dario Naharis. Sorry, I was just blanking for a minute there. But if you play like someone like Dario who wants a lot of Stormcrows, one of their problems is their morale isn't so great. So if you're playing against an opponent who isn't going to completely lean into to bonking down your morale, having Marcelyn in a Stormcrow mercenary unit to make him 1 point and then having a bubble of +1 to morale test rolls is really not that bad of a deal. I think that it makes the Stormcrows have a little bit more staying power, and the sacrifice of morale is not felt so much because you're getting that buff. Dauntless, of course, is a fine ability. If you're playing him in a unit that's a little bit more well suited to having a good morale, like Unsullied Swordmasters, it's very likely that every single time you pass a morale check, every time you take a morale test, you're going to be gaining a wound on top of that, and it makes it a difficult thing for your opponent to want to go into them, especially if you're bringing other healing NCUs. Thinking about Miri in this one. So overall, I think Marcelyn, the attachment looks. His like sticker is very unimpressive, but once you think about some of the other things that he can do, I think he gets a little bit more valuable. Overall, I think that Targaryen's Hero Box 3 is one of the more exciting releases they've had in a while. I really enjoy playing my Blood Riders. I play Khal Drogo quite frequently, and that doesn't mean that I was super excited about his release. I do like some of the Blood Riders as attachments, but for the most part, I was really hoping to get a little bit more of a way to vary my list building within Targaryens, because the hero boxes, every other faction outside of like a few releases here and there, like our Kingsguard or Rainbow Guard, they bring so much more experiential variance to a faction. It's almost like you get to experience a whole new lens of looking at your models, and that type of experience or that feeling hasn't been something that Targaryens have had in a while. They've been very much pointed in the way that they build their lists, and getting this hero box ends up really changing the way we can look at things. It's still like, I feel like a lot of this is Unsullied the box, but I don't feel like that's a terrible thing. There's a lot of really cool things in here, especially when we're looking at the 4-point NCUs. I think Hisdar might be like the most lacking thing in this box. It's a tie between Hisdar and and Marcelyn's Marcelyn's unit attachment as far as mopey things are concerned. But I could definitely see someone changing my mind in terms of Hisdar. I just don't have the table time with him to really make a full call on that. But overall, I love this box, and I've been playing tons of Targaryens solely because of this box coming out, so I'm hoping everyone else is enjoying it. Otherwise, I know it's been a while since I've made an Ice and Fire video. It hasn't been that I'm like disconnected from the game or anything, just a bunch of things going on, and I've been trying to mess around with some other games lately. It's just there's so many things out there that I find interesting that it's difficult for me to always find the focus to get back into Ice and Fire. So, with that, if there's anything that you're wanting to see me talk about in future videos here for Ice and Fire, let me know in the comments section below. I know I have quite a few releases to catch up on in terms of unit reviews, but I'm always interested in hearing what people would like to listen to me talk about first. So leave that in the comments section below. Otherwise, thanks for making it to the end of the video, and I look forward to making the next one for you.